So when I moved in, we had this really cool little cupboard, and I decided to make a few boxes to keep in the cupboard. Of course, it had to be a little more custom made, and so I got Amazon delivery boxes, and I cut it all into shapes, measured and everything. And after a little while of it being like that, I decided, well, it has to become pretty. And so became my venture on figuring out which way would be the best. And I initially had 4 different trials as to which way would be the easiest to cover the boxes. Is it necessary to cover all sides? And so on. And the technique that I'm going to show in this video is the one that was for me the easiest, and most functioning, I would say, as all 4 sides don't need to be covered, as long as it's 3 at least. And yeah, it's all about the name badge. And yeah, with this I did also realize that decifix is the easiest thing to use. All the paper and all the decifix I used for these projects were all from leftovers of other projects. So for example, the decifix I actually got for covering, I believe it was another box. No, I got it for covering our bed drawers, our bed drawers. And well, I thought I needed a lot more, and this is what was left over. And yeah, so I used a few for this project, or I used a lot for this project, and basically this was the leftover of other boxes I had also covered in our home, as well as a splash guard at our basin. So yeah, and then the wrapping paper, I got that like on sale, I believe, somewhere, and I just thought it's really nice for the intention of using it for these boxes. It was, however, at like, I think, age old. So yeah, most of the things in this video has obviously then been upcycled, and if you would like to do something similar to this, I am sure everything you need is in your home. So yeah, the reason why I find decifix a little bit easier for this project, as you can see, I could just put it down and I didn't need to use extra glue, I didn't need to use tape, and it looked really nice and neat. I, of course, when I had to use the wrapping paper, I then did have to use tape, or not tape, glue. And obviously for the shield, the name shields, I also had to use glue. So the tricky part of when making your own boxes, it's never 100% correct, or maybe if you're a perfectionist it is. I, however, even though I measured everything to the T, and I actually measured out the little shelves, then I measured out the size of each box, it was still not 100% perfect. However, upon first glance, one does not notice it. It is only when you actually try to put it together or wrap it that you notice, oopsie. So yeah. I started off by just wrapping the each side, and then what I found easier was to complete a side, so I actually tuck it in the top and the bottom before continuing on. However, I do believe with the other ones I might have did it done it different. We will look at how I did the other ones a little bit later. So on this round, I actually show from start to finish what one box looks like, and then later in the video I actually have the rest of them, how I then did the rest of them, because it was a little bit more bulk. It wasn't just one or two boxes, it was actually then multiple. So I basically did a little bit more bulky things on a bulk system. So yeah. Then on to the next part. Once the box is completely neatly packed away, or at least wrapped, I then start with making out the name badge. So because every box is a different size, I had to actually measure each one individually. What I was using for the name badges were old packing paper, which we actually keep to make to use as wrapping paper for gifts, or these for gifts aimed at people a little bit older. So not necessarily children. Children, we still like to make it a little bit more bright. However, these ones are very practical, just to either leave it brown or to draw a few things on it, and keep it nice and pretty. So once I have my size, I then just took about, well, 1 centimeter off each side in total. So it was, on some of them I had to make -5 millimeters, and the others, as this one, I could actually just go 1 centimeter, as it was from an edge or something like that. So it all depends on where I got the cut from. So if it was already from an edge, it was 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter. If it was from the middle of the paper, then it was usually 5, 5, 5, and yeah. So I'll just explain a little bit with regard to the watching series. I would have actually loved to do this just as a plain ASMR. However, there is building, they are building in our building at the moment, and it is constant rattle and loud noises as they use one of their power tools. And throughout the days that I was actually making this, they were heavy at work, and I just put up my series quite loud and I continued my work. And this is, yeah, things I do to keep me occupied when there's a building up above. So yeah. Then to be able to write all the letters in a certain height and format, I then continued measuring about 5 millimeters top and bottom to kind of give me that the height that I needed, and a little bit in, I think it was about 5 millimeters to each side as well. And I then basically had to count every word, every letter, so that I can then divide the space I had into the amount of letters. And so not having everything scrunched up or not having space to actually finish the word, which was obviously quite important if you are trying to make everything look quite uniform, or sort of uniform, then it kind of helps if you're a little bit more spaced out, a little bit more organized on that. Yeah. And then just doing it freehand. I believe I've had this this type of writing style as like big, bold and everything since I was a teenager. Actually getting like a few other things that I had to do, I also did this, and I think it was quite common, maybe still is, however, it was quite common when I was younger, for us to actually use this style when having to make headings or anything like that. There's of course another handwriting that I also like to use, and it's a little bit more pointy. I just didn't feel like it actually fit the theme with regard to these boxes. And yeah, another one that is, for example, a little bit more streaky. So if one takes a pen and just make like 4 or 5 lines where just the one would have been, I like doing that too. I like that effect as well. However, this is the one that I found to be the nicest for this theme. So then lining the word, as the whole word will be, or all the letters would actually be blackened out, completely written in black. It was quite easy enough to think, okay, if I make a little bit of a movement failure, it's not a bad thing, because I still had to color it in. And I was so thankful for my partner actually having these pens in the home, even before moving in, because they were such a joy to write with, or at least to make this type of writing with. And yeah, it was brilliant. Once the writing is then done, I drew sidelines. I think this one I actually made a little bit of a judgment error with regard to the stemples that I had been using, or that I would be using, so I had to make a little bit of improvisation. And on the others, I believe I did use a ruler for these lines. But I like the whole concept of a little bit of a grey line, just to give that clean effect. So yeah, there you can see I noticed my error of not using a giving some space for the pot. So I just improvised, which I think is quite necessary when making your own do-it-yourself things. It's not always about perfection, it's just sometimes about enjoying. And I did enjoy making this quite a lot. It's the first time in a very long time that I was using stamps. I remember my mum always had stamps for us, and yeah, we obviously we were able to, not obviously, sorry, we were able to make cards for friends and family, and just in general use stamps, and it was so sweet. I can't even remember what happened to them or where they are right now, which is a pity because we had quite a lot of nice ones and we had quite a lot as well. So in my eagerness to actually erase the pencil lines, I forgot that I needed the pencil lines to cut the sides. So there I cut the 1 centimeter off on the edges. And try to continue erasing. Yeah, I did realize doing the whole erasing thing after the ink has been, or at least the stamps has been used, was a little bit late. So on the others, I was actually using, I was erasing before I was using the ink. Then after all has been erased and the workplace is clean again, and the ink is not dry yet, I moved back to the boxes. And as you can see, with 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter, it actually leaves a little bit of a frame, encouraging the, or at least showing that the box is actually covered and it's neat and tidy. So this is the moment where I thought, okay, should I leave it and let it dry naturally, or am I going to make a plan? And plan it was. So there you can see the ink was definitely not dry, and this is also something major that encouraged me to actually make a little bit more in bulk, giving the time, giving the ink actually the natural time to dry, and yeah, not having to waste toilet paper that much. So I had this little crafting glue, which worked really nicely. Spread all over, especially on the edges. And almost done. What a joy to use. And then paste. So obviously these ones I had to then straighten it out and make it uncrease like a good ironing should. And obviously because this one the ink was not yet completely dry, I had to be careful on the edge and press it more. Now obviously, as I said, make sure the edges are well done. Otherwise you might have to do that. It is also another technique just to get it on initially and then paste the edges at the end. But yeah, because of the crafting glue, it did need to stand a little bit to dry. Luckily, because it was decifix, the whole box didn't need to dry. It was just the labels, so I could actually return it into its space in the cupboard. And that's how I made the boxes all in one, and then off to how I bulk made them. And so I actually started making the name with the name. I started with the name badges because I had written the names on the front before. It was easier to actually just make the name badges, label which name badges which. I try to keep it nice and small so I can still, when I do the cutout, it is actually removing the pencil written name. And yeah, I did about 4 boxes at a time for these ones because obviously I had to empty them out and then put them through, and then returning the boxes obviously in their place. These name badges took me about a day, but purely because I decided I will be focusing on them and giving them enough time to dry, and so on. So just continue this route until all the boxes are, until you have labels for all of the boxes. Then cutting them out, obviously because I was removing some spaces from the outlines, one does not have to be that careful and meticulous when cutting out, just as long as it's roughly the right size. And it's amazing how many of these labels one can get out of one packing paper. Good. So once I had everything nicely cut up, I then started getting all the measurements out and do the preparations for cutting and sew. What is the 5mm or the 1cm? I must apologize for the wobbly screen. I think the camera was a little bit too heavy for the stand, or it's just because I was actually working on the screen or on the table where the camera was stood. It got a little wobbly, but because I did all of it bulk, well, there's no retakes, right? So yeah, I also measured out where I would be putting the words, and I actually wrote all the words out in pencil, so that my pencil work is pretty much complete. On to the next step. I then only put the grey lines on every name badge. So I popped every single one just quickly through. And then once I got all of them done, I started with the black markers. Now, as I moved to Germany about a year ago, I had to sharpen up my German skills, and everything in the home is thus German. And yeah, it is my third language. I'm actually South African born, however my father is German, and I have basics. However, there are still some mistakes that I make, and it was so funny because when I was writing these out for the test phase on the boxes, I made some errors. So for example, instead of for the light bulbs, I wrote Glüben because it made sense to me as a globe. And I just directly translated it, and my partner was he was teasing me so when I actually finally wrote it correctly, because I actually used a translator app to make sure that this is gonna be decent. And he was like, "Oh, but where's the gluten?" And even though extra, for example, is still wrote wrong, that is actually what inspired me to start translating them, because I wrote extra the way I write it in Afrikaans, with the EKSTRA, and my partner was like, "That's not how you spell it." And I was like, okay, maybe I should actually use a translation with this, with all the words. So yeah, after I wrote everything down in black ink, I started cutting the edges. So obviously I had to cut the edges before I start erasing everything, as well, that's the whole point of me drawing the lines. And everything had to be erased before I start with the stamps, otherwise, well, the stamps get ruined. And I just thought maybe to put these a little bit in fast forward because it looks so cool, especially the writing part. So yeah, and it's quite satisfying seeing the little heap of strings there. And if you do this project close to Easter, it's also a good way then to use these little strings for like the Easter egg nests. Then you don't have to go buy them, you have them already. So yeah, once that's done, I then used an eraser to erase with a pencil, what you normally do with an eraser. So yeah, once again, this fast forward just looks so fascinating because it's just repetitive, but yeah, so satisfying. And once I obviously cleaned my workspace, I started with the stamps. So I will not lie, I felt a little bit like a banker for those two, and then I realized, well, that's not gonna work because the stamps actually need to dry once again. So I did do a few at once, just at least the pots, and then I randomly decided which flower, which plant would suit the picture best. So this one, for example, I believe it was because it was such a big space next to the word. I actually decided on a bigger plant thing. I don't know, I think it's just my stamping skills, but I don't feel like my stamps came out perfect the way I'd love them to, except for the pot. I really like the pot. So yeah, and then this one, for example, was a little bit more of a longer word, so I used the little ball plant, which looks like a cactus. And that was basically my thinking process with a few different ones. Of course, I did change them up and move them around, and I think in the cupboard they could be next to each other, they could not, but it was basically like all, oh, okay, I'll do this one for now. And there you go, that's all of them drying. Once I was then done with those, I was able to plan out the boxes and start wrapping them. Obviously with this, one has to then take everything out to be able to twist a box a little bit more, or at least one of them, I believe. I used the one as my example, and then I continued cutting them roughly the same. I tried to measure measure which way would actually cover most, and this is where I kind of feel like, now that I look back to it, I could have maybe gotten more boxes covered in decifix if I had covered towards the other side. as I was trying to cover the entire box, and it's only at a later stage where I was like, I didn't need to cover the entire box. Like, it would have also worked perfectly fine, or it does work perfectly fine with the back part not being covered. So yeah, as you can see, I actually then did use the same one, just to at least get the width, because all of them are the same height, or at least the height, sorry. And did a bit of a bulk cut there as well. I believe I took out about 3 or 4, covered them, and then returned them to their original stowage. As with the boxes, obviously, they do contain things still, so they need to be packed out and then covered and then put back in, otherwise the entire bed would be full. With the decifix, obviously it went quicker, and I could actually get them in and out quite quickly. With the normal wrapping paper and the crafting glue, it did take a little bit longer because the glue had to actually dry on the box itself, so that did make it a little bit longer. And as you can see, it's basically the same process that I did with the first box I showed. And then started preparing the wrapping paper, also doing a bulk cut as with the decifix. These were, some of them were really long, and then others were much shorter because, well, the wrapping paper was used a little bit. So yeah, the nice thing about decifix is that you have that little bit of a guidance, where with normal wrapping paper you don't really have that, or usually you don't have that. I've heard of ones that actually do have that. This is the part where I actually got the trick, because wrapping paper is a little bit smaller. I just measured it out on my cutting board and I cut the 4, and that was so much easier. So yeah, the 2 sets, or the 2 parts of wrapping paper I had, one was a little bit longer and the other one was a little bit shorter. So I then just divide a little bit more. So the boxes that were a little bit bigger, these are the ones that are more showing towards the inside of the cupboard. These I then covered with a longer piece of wrapping paper, fortunately having a part over. However, the leftovers I can use in my scrapbook, so that was luckily not too much of a problem. But yeah, so the longer part, the bigger boxes got covered with the longer parts that I had, and then the smaller boxes were covered with the shorter parts, which was then basically leaving the back open. And it worked quite well. I also followed a similar technique as what I did with the decifix, sticking the base side and then cutting so I can fold it in on the insides, and so, but sticking, or at least pasting the glue on the actual box, otherwise it gets really uncomfortable working with the wrapping paper. I do believe I had moments where I got a little bit confused with how I put the wrapping paper. I was like, oh, I should have started on that side or something like that. But yeah, I think my biggest challenge with these was literally that the box weren't 100% perfectly rectangle, that they had a little bit of an edge a little bit skew here, a little bit skew there, because even if your paper's then straight, as soon as you start pasting them, it starts going wonky on one side, and then you have either way too much paper on the one, or at least you start having way too much paper on the one side and then way too little on the other. So I had like edges where I had to scrunch up the paper just so that it doesn't do that at one stage. So that was the only challenge. However, I think I've mentioned this before, if you're making it all on your own, and yeah, you have the name badge and you don't even notice these, and it just gives a little bit of extra character. So yeah, it was actually quite fun for me to do. I tried not to cut off the insides that I clipped, feeling that it kind of left, I rather folded it in because it left a smoother edge than just making the little triangle. So yeah, and this is just basically how it continued. The final sprint is always the best part, because you can just feel it coming together and it's like, oh, it worked, and I don't have an awkward corner and everything like that, and just tucking it in the inside and tucking at the bottom. So satisfying. And in it goes. Perfect. So as soon as my box was covered, I would then immediately put on the name badge, because I had the contents lying next to me. I could then look, okay, what do I have? What am I putting on there? And let's restack it, let's repack it. I also did a little bit of organization while going at it. As for example, with the batteries, we had these big Kinder Joy eggs that we got, and if you look on the right hand side, these little holders, when I saw it, I'm like, this is something I'd love to repurpose. And so when I looked into the cupboard, I'm like, it'll work perfect for holding batteries, especially because you can then kind of group it. And yeah, so we had a little holder for the AAA batteries already, and I then just put like the AA's in there, and yeah, I got a nice little, I wrote a little marker on it, labeling what it is. So yeah, this is, I would say this project also helped a little bit with clearing out. So of course batteries also have a little bit of a shelf life, so I was also able to then just check on if they're still okay. Can we still keep them? Is there one or two? Are there one or two that I would need to throw away? And there were in fact some. So yeah, this is the nice little holder for the AAA's, and we actually buy them like that, so it's absolutely brilliant. And I think the other ones, they are also from different providers and stuff like that. So yeah, we don't really have a lot of things that work with battery, but one or two, and then it's always nice to have them. So yeah, me checking on all the batteries that are on the side, and there we go. That's a chuck. That is a keep. And straight in the egg it goes. I think it's a keep. Let's see. No, it was also infected, and those ones are keeps. So straight into the egg it goes. And that's an odd one, so I can put it in the other one. And I also labeled them according, like AA. And, extra. So yeah, I think having a marker in the house is literally one of the must-haves when keeping organization a little bit. So, because I mean, just saying what is inside is a perfect way to not have to fumble around what's in here, especially if it's with items that you don't use every day. If it's now a thing that's quite common, yeah, of course it works. But for things that, for example, the batteries that we really don't use that often, or for a multi-storage system like the one with the boxes now, it is so useful to actually have the labels, because even though we know that it's in there, you don't want to think about, oh, in which box was it last time. It's always nice to just be like, look down sport, look down bags, look down batteries, and all's done. So yeah, I just followed the process and it all, once dried, looked like this. So I hope this gives you a little bit of inspiration and you enjoyed my little talking over it. I wish you an amazing day, evening, morning,